Hey, today I'm going to give you the dirt on a really interesting threat model called Includes No Dirt. And I'm rather surprised because it's probably the best model I've ever seen in terms of fitting in terms that spell something that really means something. And I've got the originator of it here, right here on the show. So stay tuned for CISO Tradecraft. You're going to love this one. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy, and I'm going to be your host for today. And I've got Bill Dougherty today on the call. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Hey, G. Mark, it's a pleasure to join you here today.
And I love the background. We were talking before the show. He's out in Napa Valley, and I'm not. But anyway, that looks pretty cool. But before we get rolling, kind of a quick reminder, because coming up shortly is CruiseCon. It's the flagship of cybersecurity from the 8th to the 13th of February, coming out of Port Canaveral, Florida. And Admiral Mike Rogers will be there. I'm going to be there. A bunch of senior CISOs are going to be there. What a great opportunity for networking and getting a chance to get away from the cold and the snow if you're from up north. So go to cruisecon.com. And if you decide you want to come join us, save yourself some money. Use the code CISO Tradecraft 10 and you'll be able to get a discount. Here's an awesome tool that will help you leverage AI to detect security vulnerabilities in your software. ZeroPath is a SaaS tool that can help you secure JavaScript, Python, Go, Java, C#, and PHP. And their Wall of Fame lists the open source vulnerabilities that they found already, and you can put the same world-class tool to work for you. Schedule a personalized demo today at zeropath.com. Okay, back to Includes No Dirt. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Bill, who are you and how did you end up doing this?
Well, my name is Bill Dougherty. I'm the CISO for a digital healthcare company called Omada Health based in San Francisco. Been here about 8.5 years. In Omada, we specialize in cardiometabolic diseases, so type 2 diabetes, hypertension, things like that. We also have a physical therapy program. All of it delivered online through a smartphone app with cellular connected devices like glucometers and scales and blood pressure cuffs. Pretty cool company. Prior to here, I was the CTO and CISO for a data center company for 5 years. I did a stint in site operations at StubHub.com, part of eBay, and been bouncing around the Northern California tech scene for more years than I'd care to admit.
Well, it sounds like you've had some great opportunities and things like that from a career perspective. And I was just talking to somebody a little bit earlier today on LinkedIn who is interviewing for a VP of security job. And he said, hey, go back and listen to, I think it was episode 106 of CISO Tradecraft, which I recorded a couple of years ago, about how to get your first CISO job. And I'm thinking, there's some good stuff in there. And sometimes you forget about things that you've written. And then you come back a couple of years later and you go, whoa, not too bad. Other times you look at stuff and you go, I'm so sorry, my name's on that. But you wrote this a little while ago, didn't you? This Includes No Dirt. Can you tell me a little bit about the background here?
Yeah, I think we published this in 2019. You know, time's been compressed the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
The genesis of it, Patrick Curry, who's our VP of compliance, and I, we were doing our risk assessment at the end of 2018. And in healthcare, you're required to do an annual risk assessment. And actually, nobody tells you what that means. Nobody tells you how. They just say, there's a checkbox with your auditor that says, did you do an annual risk assessment? And at the end of 2018, we decided that we wanted to start doing threat modeling. I've done a little bit of threat modeling in other places. I thought it was a good idea. But we couldn't find a model that we liked. So, and there's some really good models out there, like a Stride, which has been around forever. I think it came out of Microsoft.
Yep.
A guy named Adam Shostak wrote the definitive book on it, and it's amazing. And if you want to get into threat modeling, buy Adam Shostak's book before you read my white paper. It's much better.
And he's a great guy. And by the way, for people who have not heard of Stride, well, kind of shame on you. But if you remember your trivia, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege.
That is correct.
About computer security threats, basically technical type threats that you could go ahead and have a problem of. And that is one of the domains of information or things we got to worry about as a CISO.
Right. So Stride was really developed to focus on application development. And it really focused on security issues. In healthcare, I also have to worry about compliance issues and I have to worry about privacy issues. And sometimes the security issue runs smack dab in conflict with a privacy or compliance issue. Let me give you an example. We tend to, in the security world, want to authenticate and authorize everybody. And we want non-repudiation. We want to know who did what when. There are systems you sometimes have to put in place that require anonymous reporting. And so knowing who did what when actually runs in conflict. And so when you're trying to do a risk assessment or a threat model, you have to know what the goals of the system are. And then you have to figure out, does the system match its goals? So we sat down and said, how do we combine security threat modeling using Stride as our base with some of the goals for compliance, some of the goals for privacy? Looked around, found a privacy model called Lindum, which is also really very good for privacy things. And
trivia time, what that stands for?
Linking,
Identifying, non-repudiation, detecting, data disclosure, unawareness, and non-compliance.
Yeah, you've got that memorized far better than I do. I used to be able to rattle that stuff off. So we said, okay, well, let's see if we can combine these. Then we took it a couple steps further, and really had two big ideas. The first big idea was that it had to be broader than just application development.
Okay.
So we started with, we want to model a system, and a system can be as broad or as narrow as you want to define it. So a system could be a new application. System could be a network. For us, we're kind of a SaaS first, SaaS only type company. So a system is the vendor we're bringing on board for a new SaaS product. Or we've used this for some M&A activities. And so a system could be the thing we're thinking about buying. So it can be as broad or as narrow.
So pretty flexible then. Yeah.
Right. But we wanted this very repeatable process. The second was if we're going to go very broad as our definition of a system and we want to model lots of systems, it has to be fast. And so we sat down and said, well, how do we make this fast? And one of the ways we made it fast is we looked at the various goals of a system that you'd be looking at in a threat model and said, well, if we have controls in place that meet these and the new system adopts those controls, I don't need to spend a lot of time modeling it again. So as an example, we have a fairly robust authentication mechanism with multi-factor. We adhere to all the rules of NIST 863B. It's very robust. If we're bringing on a new SaaS vendor and it will integrate to that existing authentication mechanism for single sign-on with SAML, then I can just check that box and move on with my life. I don't need to go any deeper in terms of a modeling standpoint. So, and what that meant was that we could put together checklists and say, tell me what the new thing is. And then for authentication, does it adhere to our existing standards? Yes or no? If yes, move on. If no, tell me more. And that meant that we could model a lot of things very, very quickly.
So it's almost like an object-oriented modeling approach where you've gone to go ahead and said, hey, we've already defined the system. We know it's in there. We're satisfied that it meets our requirements. So if I drop this thing into a larger structure, I already know what that's doing. I don't have to go ahead and do it a second, a third, or a fourth time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the models includes No Dirt, which is, I take no credit for the name. Patrick, my co-author, he took all of the principles that we got from Stride and from Lindum and other places and put them in an acronym generator and spit out includes No Dirt. Ended up being kind of a cool name for us because if you think about it, we don't want any dirt in our system, dirt being a metaphor for, risk or cruft or whatever. So ideally, you'd want your system to be dirt free. So we call it, the shorthand is the No Dirt model.
Yeah. And there's 14 words in there. I'm not going to try to remember those because I don't. Although I did go through the list and I figured normally I find when somebody has a model and it fits to a word or pronunciation, they go like, yeah, somebody had to kind of bend something out of shape a little bit to make it sound right. And theirs actually doesn't look all that bad. So well done. But if there's an acronym model that works, I need to go figure out what that is at the end of the show. And maybe you'll find something that stands for CISO Tradecraft. Like,
We'll work on that for you.
all righty, sounds good. We got a deal. So how does this no dirt model that you have balance both your technical and non-technical requirements? Because it sounds like this thing is capable of looking at more than just IT systems from a technical perspective.
To be clear, it is mostly focused on technical, not non-technical. It's just technical across multiple domains. So technical across security and privacy. And we're not really using it to model non-technical systems, although presumably you could. But how it makes that balance is just including all the main the main principles that we're trying to achieve.
Right.
And figuring out for a specific system, the person who's modeling needs to know what the system does, and they needs to know, does this apply or not? So, and the starting point for each of those principles is essentially a series of yes or no questions. Like, does the system need to authenticate people? Yes or no? Pretty simple question. If yes, does the system use our existing authentication mechanism? Yes or no? Again, and you can see how you could get through that really, really quickly on stuff that is just a repeat.
Right.
The benefit of that is you're not reinventing the wheel every time. And for things that are kind of important and complex, you can get down to the meat of the thing very, very quickly.
And that's very helpful. I mean, I have sitting on my desk for one of the things, and it's not really a threat model, but it kind of is in a way, from an insurance renewal application with all the questions of during the past 12 months, if this happened, has this been any changes? How many of this, how many of that? And then, of course, first thing you hope is, I hope they didn't change it too much from last year, because you can copy it over. But here, what we're looking at is to say that it's looking at technical items and systems, could be technical and non-technical systems, but those areas. And again, looking at the terms that you have in there, that includes no dirt, it is a technical thing. But is it really designed for someone who needs to be a network architect or an engineer to be able to use this, or can a non-technical person make good sense of this process?
Certainly one of the goals was that a non-technical person could read the output of it and understand it. Okay. That isn't to say that I would expect a non-technical person to be able to do all the analysis. You have to be fairly versed in the system you're modeling in order to model it, no matter what that system is.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But the output should be human readable. For the most part, I have my security engineers doing the threat modeling, but they can go model an application that my engineers are doing without having to be experts in writing the code, or they can go model a network without having to be network engineers. What they need to know is, what are the important goals and the principles, and then ask questions like, how are you addressing this?
Okay, got it. And so what I find also interesting about your model is that you've created, on the cover of your paper, you got a little Venn diagram looking at security, privacy, and compliance. And most of us tend to focus on security models and things such as that. And we get good at that, and we cover that because that's really what we focus on. And privacy, of course, is a big deal. Sometimes we say, well, there is an entire privacy department, or the lawyers take care of that, and we have sort of a tangential. And both you and I know security and privacy are not the same thing. But then, of course, add in there the compliance. And so does that get driven by different frameworks for the compliance requirement? And as such, do you have questionnaires for each one? Or does someone say, hey, I've got to deal with PCI DSS, so I've got to go to the drawing board and come up with the right questions? Or is there a repository of things to help out with the major?
I would say that the most accurate way to think about this is I'm ultimately modeling against my own control framework, and my control framework is guided by what I have to comply with. So I'm a healthcare company. I have to comply with HIPAA. I also have to comply with my customer contracts and a variety of other obligations. We're high trust certified, so we have to comply with high trust. So, and every company has something they have to comply with.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that there is a separate questionnaire. It's that for the most part, the things I have to comply with are baked into these principles that we are dealing with. So Good example. HIPAA security rule requires protected health information to be encrypted at rest and in transit.
Okay.
So
Sounds like two
within
questions.
right.
Yeah.
But so within the system, it's going to ask, is the data being encrypted at rest and in transit?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, sometimes that answer is yes, and sometimes that answer is no. Earlier on, it's what kind of data are we modeling? Because not all of the systems in my company contain health information. I have employee systems. I have email. I have all kinds of other systems as well.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what your system does. Tell me what kind of data it's in there. But then we're always looking at things like baseline controls. We want all of our data encrypted at rest and in transit. So if you tell me yes, again, I likely get to move on. If you tell me no, well, now I need to go dig deeper. And depending on how built into the model was a scoring mechanism. So if encryption is important to me and you say it's encrypted, then I don't add any points to the risk. If you tell me it's not, I do add points, and that increases the score, and a higher score is worse from a risk perspective.
It was like golf. Okay.
Right. So when one of my people gives me a completed threat model, the very first thing I do is I look at the score. And if it scores super low, it's like, okay, this probably isn't something that needs a whole lot of my time as the CISO. If it scores super high, I probably want to pay more attention to it. So you can imagine that if you have a repeatable process with a reliable scoring mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
you then allow all of the leaders, the manager and the VP and the CISO to triage things.
And that sounds like a real time saver and a real way to go ahead and focus effort. And that's kind of interesting when you think about this. Is this an IT tool? Is it a IT security tool? Is it a GRC tool? Or is the answer yes?
Actually, it's yes. In fact, if you read in the paper, you'll see that we instrumented the questionnaire in the GRC tool,
Mm-hmm.
so that the scores are always captured.
Got it.
Which means, like for us, we've got hundreds of vendors, and every single one of those vendors has a risk score based on a threat model, based on what kind of data we're putting in there, and what kind of contract we have, and where the data is, and what the thing is supposed to do. And so I can tell you my risky vendors from my non-risky vendors for every single vendor that we share data with.
And that was what I was going to get to next, was in terms of who's the subject of this. Is that you're saying, I'm thinking, okay, I look at my own environment, because typically you look at your own risks and things like that. But what I'm hearing from you is that this is a great way to go ahead and potentially do risk modeling of third parties, vendors.
It is for us. And again, I said at the outset that we're like a SaaS first, SaaS only type company, being a 14-year-old company. So with the exception of the systems we write for our own product, all of our corporate systems are SaaS. Mm-hmm. So if I'm not good at third-party risk management, then I'm not good at IT or security at all.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of companies that have some portion of my data.
Touche. So that makes good sense. And that's not always true for every organization, but it's kind of nice to be able to have that standardized approach, because I'm on the other end of it, where I get all these questionnaires from either third parties or insurance companies or whatever. It's like, can't you guys just ask me the same question every time? And then I'll go ahead and say, here, copy, paste, and off we go.
We have to send out questionnaires to all of our vendors. We also get questionnaires from all of our customers. So security questionnaires are the bane of my existence. I hate them. I could spend the next hour ranting on a soapbox about how stupid and pointless security questionnaires are.
Too bad you can't say to whatever customer sent you something, said, wait a minute, we got something even better than what you asked. It's our model. So, and here's our self-scoring, by the way. Or even if you did it externally, would this be done, in this case, like self-scoring, or would you actually have your third-party auditor come and said, we're going to use your own checklist for you, so you can then go ahead and present that to all of your customers and get out of the word business of filling out these stupid forms?
Well, that's what a SOC 2 and a high trust are supposed to be.
Right.
We go through all of the pain and expense of a third-party risk assessment, and then we don't rely on it.
And I work with organizations that are a little bit too small to make a cost justification for a SOC 2.
So also built into the white paper, includes no dirt, is a stripped down security questionnaire that we also use. I think we've added some questions since we originally published this. Mm-hmm. But the basic philosophy was, don't ask a question unless, if you didn't like the answer, you would refuse to do business with the vendor. Other than some very basic things like, tell me what your system does, what type of data you have, and give me a system, a data flow diagram. But otherwise, if I ask you 10 questions about your password policy and I didn't like any of your answers and I'm still willing to do business with you, then why did I ask you about your
Why
password
did I ask those
policy?
questions in the first place? Yeah, I'm looking at some of these samples
So
that you have in the appendices and things such as that. And it's even got some scoring in there. If you say yes, get this. If no, then go on to that, or required, not required, etc. So it really is more almost a methodology in a way as well as a scoring system. You're not just left to guess, like someone says, hey, are you compliant with NIST SP 800-171? Okay, well, that's an awful lot of controls to go through, but maybe some of those things aren't going to be critical to your relationship that you have with your SaaS provider. You just don't even bother asking them.
right. Like, how does NIST 800-171 apply to this particular system?
Yeah, and if it does. Now, here's kind of the interesting Don Rumsfeld question. What about the unknown unknowns? The questions you don't ask and therefore you don't know the answers to.
There will always be unknown unknowns. The best way to uncover them, I think, is to spend more time and effort on what the system is and what it's supposed to do, and less time on things that you just know it complies. So
Right.
we spend a lot more time focusing on, tell me exactly the data that's going in and exactly the data that's coming out, and where is it going to be stored, and what is unique about this system, and less time on password policies or encryption or other things, because we can just check those boxes. So I can evaluate somebody without sending them a 2,000 question SIG questionnaire, of which nobody reads the answers anyway. You just feed it into your GRC, or your GRC kicks out a score, and then you do something. And more time on, show me a data flow diagram. And because we use this so often in our third-party risk assessment, and we do it during the procurement process before we buy the thing, what happens is, one of the results of this process is a list of things that we either want our business partner to implement, or we want our legal team to negotiate into the terms and conditions.
Right.
So as an example, we have a policy as well as some obligations to keep our data within the United States. So a pretty common question is, where are your data centers located, and will you attest to storing, processing, and accessing only from the US? Okay. And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, sometimes the answer is, well, we've got 10 data centers around the world. And so we'll go back to legal and go, okay, legal, we want a data locality term in the contract. And then we'll go fight with the vendor if we have to on that. But it kind of exposes that up front before we ever sign the contract. It's a lot easier to deal with that up front.
I like that. Now,
Same
continue,
thing,
please.
like I had a SaaS request come to me yesterday, and I asked, well, how do they do authentication? And the authentication was OAuth. I said, well, do they have a SAML option? And they said, yes, but it's more money. It's the wonderful single sign-on tax. And I said, go get me SAML and tell them we're not paying extra for it. And let's make that part of the negotiation. You want a deal? Okay, yes, I understand that's your higher tier. I don't care. I want SAML, so that I can automate the provisioning and deprovisioning through my authentication mechanism. And so by having the right set of questions up front, regardless of who's on my team is evaluating the vendor, they're following a standard process. We know what that process is, and we can surface these things quickly.
And it seems also kind of good from a negotiation perspective, as you know the stuff that you have to have and you know your throwaways.
Right.
And that's always kind of important to go ahead and get those figured out in advance. Now, if I'm a healthcare organization like you are, and you're subject to HIPAA or high test, then what you say is, if I go through this includes no dirt model, does that mean that I'm now know that this third party is HIPAA compliant, or is that an entirely separate exercise? Are these orthogonal to each other? What's the value of doing all these things?
So the answer is, I'd say it's orthogonal.
Okay.
Because the starting question is, does that third party access health information? And if it is, then we have to pay more attention to certain rules. And just the fact that they would have PHI in it raises the risk score for us.
Okay.
But if the first question is, are going to have health information? The answer is yes. That's an immediate signal to my legal team. Oh, we're going to need a business associates agreement. Okay. We're going to be less willing to budge on certain things like data locality. I can budge on data locality for data I don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
I can't for health information.
Right.
I can budge on password rules for systems I don't care about. I can't if it has health information. So it gives us, we're asking a set of questions based on kind of our overall policies that is telling us which systems are higher or lower risk. And that then guides what risks we're willing to accept and what risks we're not willing to accept. So again, yes, it was funny. I got 2 SaaS requests yesterday, both of which came to me and said they had OAuth. One was like for 5 users in a training system that I really don't care about. It has none of my data. I said, fine, OAuth's fine, I don't care. The other one's going to have a lot of information in it. Okay, great. This one I care about. Asking the right questions up front lets you triage it and go, this is worth my time, this is not worth my time.
Mm-hmm. So we've got these existing models that are out there like the Stride and the Lindon and things such as that will help us with security modeling and privacy modeling. But you did this, you said the first draft was over 5 years old. And are you still on version 1.0? Because most standards never stay 1.0, except maybe something like a Bitcoin. We still keep using that.
We're definitely not on version 1.0 anymore. I don't know that we've really versioned it. Like when we first did this, the reason we published it is because we were young in the industry, and at the time, like digital healthcare was still kind of a nascent thing. And no one was telling us how to do it, which means no one was telling anybody else in our field how to do it. And healthcare is the most breached industry there is. And we kind of felt an obligation to put something out to help all of our peers that were at digital healthcare startups that were getting lots of money, trying to figure out how to do this stuff. We have tweaked the model internally. We haven't republished it. I don't know if we will, because there's a certain amount of effort that you have to go through just to get, legal approval to put something out with your logo on it.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't changed the principles. We have modified some of the questions, some of the scoring. We've changed a little bit. The depth will go into certain areas. We've gone from what started off as basically like a questionnaire form that you would fill out to more like a Google Doc. So it's a little more robust. So we've changed it certainly in the 5 or 6 years we've been doing it. I'm working right now to look at new emerging risks relative to AI. And what I'm trying to figure out is, do those actually fit in the principles of includes no dirt, or are there new principles? At the moment, I think they fit. However, there are new threats and there are new attack vectors, but the principles remain the same. And so, but some of the stuff related to AI is so unique compared to what we've been doing for the past 30 years that I'm considering revving this document to actually include a full section in there on how to think about AI.
So we'll put A at the end. It'll be includes no dirt, eh? It'll be your Canadian model.
It'll become Canadian.
But yeah, because that was one of the things I was thinking about with the AI is that things are changing very quickly. And as a result, what we think the threats are of 6 months ago may not be the ones we have today, might be different 6 months from now. So it requires some fluidity in terms of our ability to manage and measure that. But the idea of doing threat modeling, if organizations are not doing threat modeling, it seems that with AI, you really, if there's anything to get you off of top dead center and get you moving toward it, it might be that.
Yes, because it is requiring, I would say, some new ways of thinking. And I'll give you an example. I'm willing to bet that if I were to ask any of your security practitioners who are watching this podcast, do you do software development on production data? Every single one of them would say, oh God, no. Like, we never allowed devs to write code against production data. We have fake data. We have a way to sanitize it. We have some process in place so that they can go play in a dev sandbox, do the job they need to do. They'll move it to staging, they'll move it to production, but you don't like basic, security 101. You don't write code against production.
Okay.
Okay. What is model training? Is that software development or is that production?
Aha.
You can't train models effectively unless you're using real data. Okay. So now we have to figure out, what does that look like in our world? Because it's really not, if I'm doing pure model training or if I'm doing prompt engineering, these are in one way more akin to software development, but I certainly haven't pushed them out to production yet.
Yep.
But they're not software development the way we've done it traditionally. There's something new. There's something different. It needs to have all the security controls of production, but it also needs to have the fluidity and offlineness of development.
That's a very interesting insight and kind of profound in a way, because as you say, that makes perfect sense, is that as you build out your AI models, you have to train on something, and that training technically sounds like dev to me. But if you train on useless information, you'll never get anything useful at the other end. So you don't really know if it's going to work.
So now let's take this a step further, because I'm in healthcare.
Okay.
Healthcare, we have a principle called minimum necessary, which means that when you're dealing with protected health information, you use the minimum amount of data and you expose it to the minimum number of people to accomplish the purpose. And the purpose has to be an allowable purpose, such as providing care or doing billing or claims or running your healthcare operation. Okay. And certainly in healthcare, there are totally legitimate purposes to use health information to train a model. The question is, when you're training a model, what is the minimum necessary amount of data?
And using training models, you want as much data as you can get in there.
You do and you don't, because there's also a cost for every additional data element.
Right.
And it depends on what the purpose of the model is. So just like we started this talking about systems and what is the purpose of the system, when you start thinking about training a model, what is the purpose of the model? So depending on the model I'm training, I might need identifiers like a name, or I might not. If you think about in my world where we have lots of different types of data, we have biometric data coming from devices, and we have interactions with the care team, and we have lots of data. If I'm doing something that really only involves biometrics, then that's the only data I need. I don't necessarily need the other stuff. So we're trying to adapt how we do things, and based on applying a set of 25-year-old rules under HIPAA and high tech to this new thing. Now, how do I adjust my threat model and make this analysis repeatable? Because we're not going to stop. We're just going to keep doing it.
And so for the environment you describe, HIPAA, high trust, things like that, I get that. What if I'm not in healthcare at all? Do I just say, hey, this is way too specific for healthcare, or does this have general applicability?
As someone who came out of e-commerce and has worked at a lot of different companies, I think it's got wide applicability. Because the same basic principles apply across the board. If you accept credit card payments, you're supposed to, under PCI, protect cardholder information. You shouldn't train your model on cardholder information unless you need cardholder information for your model. Same basic concept. And you certainly have always had this concept of masking card numbers. If you're in financial services, you've always had this concept of masking the social security number. You give that number to just anybody. So the same basic principles apply. And we also have privacy rules that apply to everybody that's not in healthcare. So like CCPA has a carve out if you're in healthcare, but if you're not in healthcare, CCPA applies. And so you still have a compliance obligation. You still have a set of rules you have to adhere to. The point for us was to put out a baseline model and then make it as easy as possible for people to cut and paste and then modify it to their own purpose. So to me, includes no dirt is a choose your own adventure kind of thing. Like, I don't expect that we got it right for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted everyone thinking in a certain way and then go make it yours and instrument it for whatever works inside your organization. Because we didn't get it right for everybody. We barely
That
got it
makes
right
good-
for ourselves.
Well, the thing is, it's a great progress in something. So I think for the sake of at least getting into the recording, let me go ahead and get the include no dirt terms, even though we're not going to dive into each one of them with the time remaining. But identifiability, which is really an anonymity, it's a privacy issue, right? The non-repudiation, creating, if you will, the avoidability of the plausible deniability. Well, I didn't do that. Well, yes, you did. You've got non-repudiation there. That's also a privacy issue. A clinical error, which is the only one that I saw that really kind of labeled you as healthcare. That's your aha, you flipped over your card. The correct application of clinical standards. That's a compliance, and one could argue that depending on what industry you're on, it could be the banking standards or it could be some other manufacturing standards, et cetera. So, but it didn't make the acronym spell out right. So I'll defend you on that one. Linkability versus unlinkability. What are we referring to here? The ability to link certain data together to come up with a conclusion, like whose record really is this? Or
Exactly. It's
okay,
the ability to link disparate data sets together. And it's directly related to the identifiability or non-identifiability of PHI.
got it. Okay, unlicensed activity, looking at on a compliance perspective, there's a proper credentials of licensure. Denial of service, absolutely. An availability issue of the CIA. Now we're into security. Privilege elevation, spoofing. These are good security stuff. Non-compliant to policy or obligations. We're back to compliance here. And of course, non-compliance is a big deal with regard to assessing it. And really, if you're looking at a model that says, hey, I've got a HIPAA requirement, I could collapse a lot of that into there to say, am I compliant? The next one I thought was rather interesting, overuse. And that tends to back to what you said about minimum necessary.
Correct.
That you want to make sure from a compliance perspective that you're not putting too much in there, because now you're disclosing information perhaps on a patient that should not be in that record. Data error is an integrity issue from the CIA. Information disclosure, C for confidentiality. Repudiation, because you had non-repudiation before with the concern about plausible deniability, and now you got repudiation with the non-repudiation. The first was privacy, the second was security. Was that just to fit the model to get the last letter in, or
No, it really
they're different things, really?
It really goes back to the tension between privacy and security, and when do you want there are times when you want plausible deniability, and there's times when you want non-repudiation. They're different goals.
Exactly. And then last one, the T for the no dirt, tampering. Again, integrity, being able to protect from that. So data error, meaning that information was changed, probably inadvertently or whatever, in the tampering. Somebody actually went in there and tried to modify stuff. And these are pretty good ways of looking, very good ways, really, of comprehensively looking at threats and risks that might be out there. And from a threat perspective, you could then go ahead and say, hey, how do we model this? How do we protect ourselves against this particular threat? If we're worried about spoofing, for example, then we say, hey, my goal is authentication. And then I could dive into the model. I could read a little bit more. And in your paper, which I'll include the link in the show notes, but it's basically includesnodirt.com/nodirt.pdf.
Yep.
37-page PDF that I'm scrolling as we talk. So no, I haven't memorized all these things. But it does nice examples at the end, how you would fill these things out, the point scoring and things. And as you indicated, entities could modify these to better meet your model score. And I see you end up with a low, medium, or high. It's a little bit like going to a Zagat restaurant. Oh, this is a 22. It must be pretty good. Or it's a 15. You get food poisoning, or however they do that.
So the other thing I'd point out, because there was a lot that didn't fit into the includes no dirt risks, there's also in the paper a miscellaneous category.
Okay.
Which is basically our generic catch-all for everything else that, depending on the thing you are modeling, you might put in there. So physical risks, environmental risks, and criminal risks, and disaster risks, and regulatory. There's a lot of stuff in there. Competitive risks. It's really, what is it that you want to pay attention to? So like disaster risks. If I was
Right.
standing up a new factory, I want to know all the environmental risks of where it's going to go. Is it an earthquake zone, a flood zone? Is it subject to hurricanes and tornadoes? But and we would account for that if that was the thing we were modeling.
Right.
But if the thing we're modeling is a new SaaS product, we may or may not be going in that deep.
Got it. Understand. Hey, is there any thoughts that you can think of as we wrap up here in the show that you'd like to leave our watchers or listeners with, or recommendations for how they could go ahead and better incorporate threat modeling into their business practice?
Yeah, a couple things. We've made this paper free download. There's no copyright on it. There's no license on it. You're free to use it. We want you to use it. We love hearing from people who have been using it. I heard from a buddy of mine who took this and turned it into an LLM. So he's got a chat bot that asks him the questions. One of the things that was an initial stumbling block, and it was such an important thing for us that we spent a lot of time on it, and it's right at the beginning of the paper on page 4, is we created a taxonomy. And because what Patrick and I realized was that the compliance people and the security people were using the same words to mean different things. And so we published a taxonomy. It's ours. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but you should have a taxonomy in your organization so that everybody who's using this has an understanding of this, what you mean, what is a risk and what is a threat. Like if I ask some people what a threat is, they're going to identify a system or they're going to identify a vulnerability. We define a threat as an actor, someone who acts. It could be a piece of code, or it could be a person, but you can think of like insider risk, insider or threats. What they do is not a threat; it's an attack vector. And so, we found it very, very important to document a taxonomy and make sure everybody knew exactly what we're saying, because a threat is not the same thing as a vulnerability, and a vulnerability is not the same thing as a risk to us. But oftentimes we use these terms interchangeable when we're kind of speaking off the cuff. But if you're going to get through like a repeatable, scalable modeling process, you better use the same term every time.
Got it. And I've got them right here. And I agree with you. We had this on the pre-show. We're talking about a threat. And I agree. It's an actor or principle. It's a source of where that danger is coming from rather than the attack vector, which is the method. And then, of course, the vulnerability is something that exposes your asset to that particular threat via that attack vector. And now that nomenclature kind of loops in, he says, I get it. And by agreeing on that common language, that common taxonomy, if you will, it's a little bit easier, a lot easier, in fact, sometimes to communicate, even with executives and managers who seem to think things are different. But if you can lock them down to this, it makes good sense. Well, this has been a really valuable episode. I have learned a lot. As I say, I was able to print this thing out because I had to read it on the airplane flying back and forth. And I think that's great work. So if you do update this, that would be wonderful. If not, I think what's out there right now, the current version, is certainly good. So for everybody who wants to take a look at it, again, the link is in the show notes. I already mentioned where to find it on the website. Last thoughts, or should we wrap up?
Really just a pleasure being here, and I appreciate you, even after this is 5 or 6 years out, that you found it valuable and you're highlighting it again, because I still think there's a lot of people out there that could benefit from this. And I'll say what I started at the beginning. If you really want to go deep diving into threat modeling, I think it's called Practical Threat Modeling by Adam Shostak. It's a great book. The good ideas in this paper from me, I stole from him.
All right. Well, we'll give Adam a shout out there. I have a gentleman I've known for a number of years, and I think he's a great security practitioner and a great guy from the time I've spent with him. So thank you very much. We've been talking about Includes No Dirt, a practical approach to threat modeling for digital healthcare and beyond, with Bill Dougherty. So thank you so much for being part of our show. For our listeners, if you like CISO Tradecraft, we're a lot more than podcasts. If you're not following us already, well, do so. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast channel, give us 5 stars if you can, because that helps boost our ratings, and then other people will find us. If you're on YouTube, appreciate it. But also, we have a Substack newsletter, and we have other ways we put out information. On LinkedIn, we'll go ahead and have a steady stream of high signal, low noise, useful information to help you along with your career. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode very much. If so, drop us a note and let us know. and let Bill know perhaps that, hey, we love this, we'd like to see more, and who knows, maybe you'll get encouraged to write the next version of the model. So until next time, this is your host, G. Mark Hardy. Thank you for listening to CISO Tradecraft, and stay safe out there.